What I'm going to talk about four qualities of Sandy's character, which really impressed me right from the word go. Sandy was actually my fifth PhD student in MIS. Preceding her were people like Chris Kemmer, Rob Kaufman, Laurie Kirsch, and so Sandy was sort of following people who were very accomplished. She had been, in some sense, in a dilemma as to how to pursue her interests in a way that leveraged her background in software development. And Jerry DeSantis strongly recommended her to come and talk with me, and that was also backed up by Cynthia Beath, Dale Goodhue, Gordon Davis, and Laurie again. And I'm mentioning all this is because I work in very many different areas and with a very different perspective than what Minnesota used to be back then, which was very behaviorally oriented. And so in a very diffident way, Sandy came and saw me. And I gave her a hard time, as I usually do, in kind of checking out potential new PhD students. And I told her that I expected her to, regardless of what other students did at Minnesota, I expected her to pick up economics and econometrics and higher level statistics, and was she willing to do so? And she assured me that, that she was going to put in all the effort necessary, and she was confident that she would be able to do that. I was still unsure. And then we started talking about what she did just before she joined the doctoral program. I think some of you know about this, but perhaps many of you don't. And Anjana is later going to talk about some of that. Just before she started in the PhD program, for 19 months, she and her husband Ron were going around the world in a tandem bicycle. And incredible as it sounds, they accomplished that over a continuous period of 19 months. And included in that, and what really amazed me was that they cycled through the roads in India and survived to talk about it. And for those of you who've been to India, you can understand that if you can do that, cycle on the Indian roads, you can do anything. And so I knew that here was a person who was really determined and somebody who would do what she set out to do. And she's made me so proud of her accomplishments. And for an advisor, as many of you know, that's the biggest gift that you can get from your students. The next quality that I want to talk about is just her ability to persuade people. Not like what you and some of you also do, which is in-your-face kind of arguments. She would do it in a very, very pleasant way, and you wouldn't even realize that you were arguing. And at the end of it all, you would be convinced about her position. And I think from your reactions, your faces, I can tell that many of you have experienced that as well. And that was just incredible in terms of how she was able to get to understand people, but more importantly, get people to understand her as well and convince them to change their positions. In fact, even during her dissertation, she did that with a couple of banks in Minnesota, and I simply got her introduced to the top management at those banks that I had worked with, and she was simply incredible in her ability to convince them or trust her and convince them that she could help them. And in fact, it ended up with them assigning her an office in both banks, and so that she lived in those banks as she collected data firsthand from these research sites, and that became a part of her dissertation. And I saw this also firsthand, the consulting assignment that we did with Gordon Davis in Germany. It was another commercial bank which had hired Accenture. Back then it was still Anderson Consulting. And as is common, there was a huge cost overrun. And so we went there and spent a number of days just to figure out why there was a cost overrun. The reason I'm mentioning, though, is that I think many of you knew that she was quite capable in software languages. What I think very few know is that she was also very fluent in German. And she could carry on conversations in a very meaningful way. And that is what really made that particular assignment a great success for us. The reason I'm mentioning it is, once again, to point to the fact that Sandy had a wide range of skills and abilities, and she succeeded in virtually everything that she set out to do. The third aspect, which I think is rather special in my mind, is she worked hard on her research and her teaching and her mentoring and all the other things that we do as academicians. But she did that because she derived pleasure out of it herself. She enjoyed doing it. She didn't do that with the expectation of some reward or many awards that she got. She did that for the love of the work itself. And I think that showed up in virtually everything that she did. In fact, my early experience with that was when our paper had been nominated for the Best Paper Award. This is, again, way back when she was still a PhD student. And for most PhD students to get an award for the best paper at CIST would be a singular achievement. She said, let's not bother to sit in that session. Who knows whether we're going to get the award or not. We got to first finish our paper. And so we walked out and were busy working on our next paper instead of sitting in. And we did get the runner-up award, but people were most surprised that Sandy, as a PhD student, was not there to collect it. Of course, I'm to blame for it as well, but I'm just pointing to the idea here that what she enjoyed was her work, not the awards that she got. And finally, what I mentioned earlier, she was one of the kindest persons that I've known, and her kindness showed up in many ways. I'll quote the words from Gerard a little later, but I think many of you have experienced this. Even when she had to reject a paper as a department editor at Management Science, she spent a lot of time and took great care and communicated constructive ideas, and in a very pleasant way. Unlike, and I work in other areas, and I've experienced that in other areas, not in IS, but you come across so many editors who are just so rude and unpleasant in communicating, why your paper is so bad. And those of you who've had experience with Sandy as an editor can, I'm sure, vouch for it. And Anandi, you listening. This is something that I think that is unique as far as editors are concerned, and the care that she took and the love she presented as far as people's research or work was concerned. And that was true also in the way she mentored people. the many PhD students that she've had, and we'll hear from Dawn. But as I said, and this was very interesting for me because one thing that she pointed out to me was that I was particularly hard and more demanding for her. And she asked me why, and then in fact she had figured it out. Basically something that I learned from my advisor, Bill Cooper, who in fact was the founder of the parent institution of Informs, is that when you are mentoring PhD students or junior faculty, you got to treat each one differently because they bring different things to the table. And it's a question of leveraging their best strengths as opposed to finding faults with them. And as I said, my dear friend DJ brings so much to the table, and Sandy worked hard in helping DJ out. And I'm sure he'll have a few things to talk about that as well. And I see that as, again, an important aspect of her character, her very basically a kind nature, which I think makes us all remember her so fondly. We want to try to get a chance for many of you to participate in this. So without further ado, let me ask Chris to share his perspectives.
Too soon. Too soon. It's words I've heard today from people talking about Sandy's tragic death. Too young, too soon. It has another meaning, which is, for me, it's too soon to give this talk. I had email from Sandy on Saturday, and on Monday I got a phone call that she was gone. And to do a eulogy, you have to have some opportunity for reflection. And I'm still in that early stage of just disbelief that she's not here. So it's very difficult, I get through this today, for me to try to give you a sense of what it was like to work with Sandy. So bear with me on this. I guess it was sort of fate in the sense that we ended up working together. I went back and in preparation for this, and I went and I looked through her CV, and Sandy and I co-authored 15 papers together. And I was surprised that, I mean, I'm her most frequent co-author, and of course, on my CV, she's my most frequent co-author, and you think, well, how can you be surprised by that? And because it didn't feel like work. It was such a pleasure to do the research with Sandy. And again, I think it was fate that we came together because both of us had worked in the software industry and had come to graduate school determined to try to do research work that was going to help practice, to help software development and maintenance bring a more scientific approach to basically improve what we had seen in practice. And we came to that, coincidentally, or fate, depending on your choice. We both studied under Rajiv Banker at Carnegie Mellon for me and at Minnesota for Sandy. And then, of course, Sandy leaves Minnesota and comes to Carnegie Mellon. And then in 1995, I moved back to Pittsburgh and walk across the street and meet Sandy at Carnegie Mellon, and that's where it starts. So since first paper in 1997 to literally a paper we published last year, we've worked continuously. And again, I've worked with lots of people and had a lot of positive experiences. Some of you are in the audience today, people I've learned from and so forth. But, and it's an overused phrase, but Sandy and I really were a team in that. We started from this shared value, and that we really believed that, people in IS needed to be working on software development and studying that as a research topic, because if we don't do it, who's going to? I mean, you can look at lots of things out there and all the kind of topics we look at in IT and lots of applications of IT, interesting applications, but at the heart of them, no matter what you do, somebody has to write software, all right? It's fundamental to what we do. And, if there's some kind of abstract topic in e-commerce that we somehow never get around to looking at, well, maybe someone in marketing will pick that up. but there's no one outside of IS who's going to look at software development, all right? And so some of us need to be at the forefront of doing that work. And so for Sandy and I, it was never a question of, you know, if we were going to do it or how, but just simply looking at the project we had and moving forward and having that kind of shared vision of, you know, what the important issues were and how we were going to approach them. And again, it didn't seem like work with Sandy. Again, I was asked to talk about the research piece here, and again, Sri did an excellent job at lunch of sort of summarizing all her research accomplishments. I'd be remiss, though, if I stopped there, and before I turn the microphone over, I have to say something else, which is that for as accomplished and how great her intellectual achievements were, she was an even better person. The best way I can explain this is you think about undergraduates when they're seniors and they go off for their first job interview, and the guidance office says, okay, here are the questions you're going to get in the interview, and be prepared for these standard questions. And one of the standard questions, of course, is, well, what's your greatest weakness? And they're all taught to say, oh, I'm a perfectionist, right? You know, and of course, that's a lie, but you know, that's the standard thing that people are told. And so if I try to sum up Sandy for someone who's never met her, I would say her greatest weakness was that she was generous to a fault. But for Sandy, that's not a lie. If there was anything that needed to be done, Sandy would do it, and then do something more. It was if, you know, we all participate in this community, and you know, I think everyone feels a sense of an obligation to, you know, to put back into the community, particularly, you know, when you're a senior person. When you're a junior person, you're sort of incurring debt. You're borrowing from a favor bank, and you know, having people read your papers for you, and having people write letters for you, and so forth. But there's this shared understanding that we have that, you know, by the time you're now a senior person, that you need to now be putting back in. That, you know, you're doing editorial work, or you're chairing committees, or you're writing those letters for people. All right, and that's how we keep things in equilibrium. And for most of us, that's sufficient. You know, are the books balanced? You know, have I made enough deposits in the favor bank to make up for my withdrawals? Sandy always was over-deposited. She just did, you know, much more than her share, and again, the long list of things that you heard at lunch today are really, I think, unmatched by anyone in our community. So, you know, this week as I sort of struggled with this and tried to make sense of it, the only thing I can ask is that perhaps if all of us try to be a little bit more like Sandy Slaughter, we'll have a better community. Thank you.
So I was fortunate to have the opportunity to take Sandy's very first PhD class in fall of 1995, and I was her first PhD student in terms of managing a dissertation. And what I thought I'd do is tell you two very short stories about papers we worked on when I was a PhD student, and sort of 3 lessons learned. And Sandy had always told me, writing good research papers is very hard. And so we did a concept paper for a WISE conference back in 1997. Presented a very sketchy paper. And we're surprised, somebody named Rob Kaufman walked up to us and said, well, since you've got the final version of this paper, could you submit it by February? And Sandy and I looked at each other and we thought, final version? This is a working paper. So we spent the holiday season that year quickly writing a paper, submitted in February 1st. It was miraculously accepted in April. It actually went in print in August. I'm sure that happens to you all the time. Okay. And I thought to myself as a PhD student, boy, this is easy. So I said, let's do it again. And it was a concept paper. I said, I've got data for this. Let's do an empirical paper. And she said, well, management science is a good place for empirical papers. So that August of 1998, we started working on an empirical paper. She said, how much data do you have, Don? And I said, oh, I have a lot. I have 10 years of data, $200 million worth of projects. And she said, how many data points? And I said, 30. And she said, that's not a lot. And I said, sure it is. I said, I pointed to a Chris Kemmerer paper from 1987 that had 17 data points. And then I pointed to a Rajiv and Chris paper that used that same data set in 1989. It says, we've got almost twice as much. And she said, okay, well, if that's all we have, she said, what we have to do is really beat this to death with different techniques to show people how we can actually do this. We used 4 different techniques. I called it Sandy's statistical sledgehammer. She called it something different. She said, the analysis isn't done until you've sufficiently tortured the data. We submitted that article in fall of 1998. It was accepted by Management Science in January 2000, went into print in April 2000. I thought, boy, this is really easy. So let me tell you the 3 secrets. It was easy because I was working with Sandy. 1, she was incredibly good at research methods. She knew if you don't have a lot of data, throw as many different techniques as you have at it as possible. We threw multiple techniques at each of these problems and impressed the reviewers because we knew how to tackle it a variety of different ways. The second secret is she could take a paper and continue to polish it like she was spinning gold. Every iteration got better and better. Now, being her doctoral student, I had a different view of it. Okay? I said she was taking a lump of coal and putting pressure on it until it turned into a diamond. But that was just a slightly different view. But she had this talent of spinning things to the point where she could continue to polish it and tell a story with the paper. But those weren't her 2 key strengths. Her strength, especially dealing with me, was her patience. She had an infinite amount of patience in dealing with us. And I think that's sort of echoed with a lot of the comments today. But those are 2 stories of 2 papers she and I worked on together, and some of the three key things that I think led to the success of Sandy and my relationship with her. Thank you. DJ?
I wrote a letter to Sandy. Just assume Sandy is listening. So it's a thank you letter to my mentor, Sandy, or from a problematic colleague. Okay. Dear Sandy, when you first moved into your new office at Georgia Tech as my neighbor, you kindly asked me if I mind your singing in your office. I said, absolutely not. I was right. It turns out that was the best music I ever had. You laugh loud and a lot. That has transformed the workplace. So not only she has transformed the ITM group, but her laugh has enlightened me. Okay? And I have to try to make my students laugh. Okay? We even quipped in my classes with apology to Reader's Digest. I said, laughter, the best education. When you first came to ask me about my research, I gave you 4 or 5 working papers and asked you for comments. I was simply pretending to tell you that I am busy working. In just about a couple of weeks, she took me downstairs to the Starbucks, for those of you who know Georgia Tech. He says, can I take you out for Starbucks? Yes. So when she took me down to Starbucks, she gave me all my working papers back with detailed comments on each and every one of them. So we went over all the comments at the Starbucks, and I was not sure I understood the comments fully. Okay? On that day, we actually had a speaker. So we went on to meet the speaker. Sandy kindly introduced me and my working papers to the speaker. Okay. Then she said, DJ is not a shy guy. That remains a fondly memory to me. As many of you know, so most of my work, I'm an analytical modeler, so I am used to make assumptions. I just assume it. Okay. She was the first one who took me and actually my colleague Chris Foreman to an open source company. Okay, so we traveled to that company, and I learned a lot how to conduct interviews and search for interesting research questions. The project was not successful, okay, as we never got the data from that open source company who promised us the data. But the trip was successful because Sandy opened my eyes on field research. And that has an impact not only on me, but also to my future and the current students. Just yesterday at CIST, you see 2 papers I'm working with the students and the colleagues on field studies. That can trace back to the impact Sandy made on an analytical modeler. On one day, when she joined us in 2006, okay, and she left very late. That day, I happened to be in my office. Okay, I was busy reviewing one article for management science, and she stopped by and chatted with me. Then I appeared to be enjoying reading, okay, or reviewing for management science. Then she said, "You could be an associate editor." So I did, hopefully not a bad one. I then have had the joy of working with her for 8 years as AE for management science. You cannot imagine how many hours she has been spending on other people's papers. By the way, the AE breakfast you served was the best, and it is free. When I first broke my Achilles tendon, I had this Achilles tendon rupture. I had too much fun playing soccer in 2011. For the first week, I was not allowed to leave the bed after the surgery, and I was very worried about my research and my classes. You sent me a beautiful card with Sandy's handwriting phrase. There's one phrase I could never forget. I still have her beautiful postcard. That phrase is, "Get yourself fixed first." That made me laugh. That made me go through the most 2 difficult weeks of my life. I could go on, tell you stories. I have my personal stories with Sandy. Let me just summarize this. Common wisdom says, those 2 words, the powerful and the nicest, do not go together. But no one in the IS world would dispute that you integrate both fully. So you are the nicest, powerful. That made you outstanding, a giant and outstanding human being. Sandy, thank you for being such a wonderful mentor. You are a lightning mentor for me. You have lightened me up. Thank you.
The first is from Gerard Cashon, editor at Management Science, editor-in-chief. Said, I first met Sandy when I became editor of Management Science, and I found working with her to be absolutely delightful. She was an incredible scholar and a model editor. As an editor, she exhibited outstanding judgment, but I believe it was more important to her to be sure that she treated all authors with kindness and respect. The same words that we hear over and over. This is a huge loss to our community and a shocking end to a life that could have provided so much more joy to all around her. I will miss her, and I know that I'm just one of many. Tech Ho is on his way to Shanghai right now, and he said he couldn't come, but he would have loved to come otherwise and talk about his experiences. But he echoed the same feelings that Jared described. Nishta Langer was also one of Sandy's PhD students at Carnegie Mellon, and she wrote, while I cannot still believe that Sandy is no longer with us, I'm grateful that I knew her and I worked with her. I can only thank her for the time she invested in me and for the advice she always gave me. She helped me out when I needed her help the most. She always encouraged and nurtured me as a researcher. I can never forget traveling with her to India and visiting the offices of the Indian IT giants in a tuk-tuk. And she was the best advisor that I could ask for and a wonderful mentor. I got a note from Cynthia B. She said she's trying very hard to tell me about some of her memories, but she's just so deeply in grief that she can't find the words to express herself. And for those of you who know Cynthia, this is the first time that I found her found her lacking words. I also heard from, again, similar sentiments from Sandy's colleagues at Minnesota in the PhD program, Sue Brown, Laurie Kirsch, Sunang, and others. And I think instead of just repeating those, what I'd like to do is to invite Ravi and perhaps Alok to talk about Sandy from Minnesota as well.
I'll just sort of recount, the day this happened. That particular morning, actually, I had sent Sandy an email saying that, we're going to be having the Management Science Best IS Paper Award ceremony, and would you be kind enough to attend? And I was actually waiting for the reply to that email, and I get this call from Samba instead. And he just gave me this news, and I was like, what? I mean, how can this be? And as the day progressed, the news started getting out. We have a weekly faculty newsletter, and an obituary was written for her. And literally, people have been streaming into my office. So many people have been touched by her out there. I think it's, for us, I think we'll try to do our best to live up to her legacy. I think the PhD program, should really, aspire to produce students like her, and I think that's the biggest sort of gift I think we can give for Sandy. So I'm really thankful. There were people who came in who were actually in other departments who were on a committee. Professor K.K. Sinha, he came into my office and he was shocked, and he was saying that she was the most amazing student. So it's at Minnesota, a lot of people have been touched by her, and their people are really sad for this. One thing that we will also do, and this was the last thing actually I was working with Sandy on personally, was a discussion about creating a new award for recognizing rising scholars in IS. Okay, and we'll talk more about this in the meeting, but this was actually an idea that DJ came up with, and we started circulating this with Alok and Ramaya Krishnan and so on over the summer, and then we had a call earlier this semester, and the notion was that we should make an ISS award to recognize people who are actually, less than 10 years out in the field, but also, not yet promoted to full professors. And we thought that would be a really cool thing to do. So in advance of the meeting that's going to follow, I would actually like to put a motion to the House saying that we name the award in the honor of Professor Sandy Slaughter. So I'll invite Alok to say a few words now.
First I'll start from my personal sort of remembrance of Sandy, and again it'll capture some of her qualities. As some of you know, I did this special issue on analytics in management science, so I wrote her a letter saying, Sandy, it'll be nice if you won't assign me some papers as an AE for next couple of years. And she was very nice about it. She said absolutely. In fact, one of the papers, I was, I think, a day late in making a decision on that, whatever, 90-day thing. And she made a decision and sent me a nice note saying that, I know that you're busy, so I thought it was an easy decision. I'll make it for you. Then as the thing got over, I sent a letter to her, to Gerard, which I guess filtered to her, is that my duties as a special issue editor was over. Very next day I had a paper from Sandy. So she was, among other things, systematic, disciplined, and perceptive. She knew that she can't let me slack, otherwise I might be doing some things that are not not so good. Yeah. But in her, I had, of course, being at Minnesota, when I took over as department chair, had lots of discussions with Sandy about the PhD program, about things that we should be doing. She was the greatest mentor and supporter for Minnesota students. So in terms of our program, I think the students have lost a great supporter of the program and mentors, and that probably can never be fulfilled. So rest in peace, Sandy. Thank you very much.
Sandy, of course, was a very accomplished scholar, but what I'll always remember her for was her humility. In the 8 years that she's been at Georgia Tech, I can tell you that none of us have ever heard her talk about any of her accomplishments or pulled rank in terms of decisions, or said that she knew German fluently, or she was on the Guinness Book of World Records. We had no idea till very recently. And that's really what I'll remember her for, that humility and great ability almost always go together.
Thanks, Sandy. As I mentioned this afternoon, I worked a lot with Sandy because of my role. It was a lot of fun working with her, as Rajiv said. There are a few personal things about her that I want to share, which you may or may not know. The way Sandy worked perplexed me. I had no idea. She used to come to meetings with a sheet of papers, green, blue, white, and I have no idea how she was organized, but she could recollect everything that happened next time around. I have no idea where she filed those notes, but it somehow worked, magic. I have a paper and a binder and so on, but I could never figure out. She was just wonderful. The second thing, which is when I started working her on this Navy project, it was interesting that she kept track of times and appointments on this old-fashioned week-at-a-day planner. I could never understand why she did that, but she did it. And at some point, it got too much, given all the commitments. I said, Sandy, there's a simpler tool. You're an IT person. Outlook has calendar. You can send appointments, you can send reminders, and she took to it very quickly. Right now, in the last month or so, she started using a smartphone for the first time. And some of you may have seen her photos with a huge, I thought my phone was big. I have an iPhone 5S, but she got this monstrous Samsung, whatever. And she didn't have time to buy a case. She put it in a Ziploc bag and brought it to the meeting. And she didn't know how to sync out. So one of our students helped her. That's Sandy. We are having a big discussion in our college on the MBA core program. My colleague Vinod is somewhere there. Vinod. So Vinod is our MBA associate dean, and we're doing something with shrinking the courses and so on. And Vinod did due diligence. He looked at 15 programs. I said, IS is only 2 of them in the MBA core. Sandy went to him and said, Vinod, if this goes away from the MBA core, you're a dead man. So Vinod completely has stopped talking about that. This Navy project, I think Sandy and I were perplexed. We think that projects have a finite life cycle. This project keeps on giving. And it's one thing that she was perplexed, and she was wondering how come the US government, some of the deficits we can understand because of these projects with academic never understand. Finally, there's something that you should know that I found out this week through her husband, and that one of the great things she did in her will was that after her estate is settled and so on, she wants to leave all the money to Georgia Tech, to the business school, to endow a PhD scholarship in her name and her husband's name. Those two got along famously well. So Sandy, we're going to miss you tremendously.
I had the good fortune to know Sandy for a long time, as many of you know, as far back as 2002 when I started my career. And you know, I learned so many things from working with her, from being around her. I'll just say 3 things really quickly. One is, and we've heard this in a couple ways, you know, she would help you no matter where you were, what you were, anywhere in the university, from undergraduate, MBA, PhD student, junior faculty, senior faculty, administration. I mean, I can tell stories where, just as an example, you know, she would always be the first person if a MBA student or undergrad would need a project. She would find some way, despite the, you know, all the things she had going on in her schedule, to find some way to help this person. You know, it didn't matter who you were. I had the good fortune to watch the way she interacted with PhD students. How, you know, as we've heard a couple of times, there was no one better at helping you understand something, but doing it in the nicest way, and so that you not only learned what you needed to do to progress your research forward, but somehow you felt better about it, even though you might be told that, you know, you weren't doing it right. And last, just in closing, you know, being around her for all those years, you know, as I've sort of progressed through things, I mean, she was really a model for how, you know, you should conduct yourself as a professor, and how you work with students, do your research, serve the community, serve the institution any way. If you wanted to see, you know, how we all, you know, the kind of person that we would want to aspire to be someone in the community, Sandy was really the person to look to. Thanks.
Sandy and Ron Slaughter, you heard from Rajiv the story. So I actually realized, you know, after doing a bit of research, that there was a book written about this incredible journey. And the book is actually based on the diaries that Sandy kept, you know, during that entire time. And so it's really narrated in Sandy's voice. So I thought I'll just share a few stories from that book. And, you know, all kinds of incredible stories of endurance. They cycled above the Arctic Circle, in Finland when it was freezing cold. And, you know, just survival, endurance under the circumstances would have been just impossible. And they somehow made it and survived to tell the tale in the morning. You know, they were in the jungles of Ecuador. And it's almost like you'll die of dehydration or thirst. And somehow, magically, an ice cream man appeared out of nowhere, middle of the jungle, and gave them both ice cream sticks. And, you know, all kinds of stories of endurance. They were in Argentina, you know, staying in the cheapest hotel room they could find. And some people are knocking on the door. Police, open up, we need to arrest you. And Sandy and Ron said, why? We haven't done anything wrong. And those people said, open the door, we have to talk to you. And then Sandy and Ron looked at each other and said, maybe they're not police, they're bandidos, possibly. And sure enough, you know, they didn't open the door, and a few minutes later, those people went away. So, you know, they survived pirates, they survived pretty hostile strangers, and, you know, even in parts of the world, like in India, where people saw two Americans cycling on the bike, and kids would run around them and chase them and call them Gora, which is a bit, you know. And in China, people would give them very strange looks, but they survived all this incredible, you know, endurance. And then they go to Russia. And just to get to Russia, you know, they wouldn't give them passport, they wouldn't stamp their visas. And apparently this is a delaying tactic. They figured that, you know, the people in Helsinki, the Russian consulate, would probably just, they think that Sandy and Ron will give up, and, you know, sooner or later. So somehow Sandy and Ron persisted enough that they let them go into Russia. And this is just after the collapse of the Berlin Wall. And, you know, they go to Red Square, and there is a line stretching like 16 blocks. And, you know, guess what people were waiting for? To get into McDonald's. So Sandy and Ron think, why did we Americans spend all this time and money and, you know, trying to fight the Cold War and, you know. So, so I think that one story I want to say is also about in India. They somehow miraculously survived not just the Indian roads, but also the Indian bureaucratic system, which makes it impossible for anyone to, both enter and leave the country, I guess. And one of the things is after somehow when they were leaving, it was miraculously smooth, except that Sandy forgot the bag where she kept all the travel diaries. And she had to make one last check to go back to, the checkpoint so that, she can finally board the flight. And so there was a very, official-looking man who stops her and says, you can't, go and get that bag. You have to talk to the duty officer. And then there's a long back and forth. And finally, Sandy asks him, who's the duty officer? And he says, I'm the duty officer. So I thought it was fantastic, all these. So if I could just say a couple of sentences from the book. In her own words, this is Sandy as I think says something about Sandy as a person. So many times during these 19 months, we were asked why. Why would these people do this, persist in the face of all this hardship, take all this upon themselves? And the answer was in the quest. To live is to be challenged, to find immense pleasure in small accomplishments under hardship. I can't find a more eloquent thing to say about Sandy. Thank you.
Ram Gopal was very nice in organizing this session together with his team at a very, when I asked him for it. Anyone? Any of our colleagues, neighbors in Atlanta? Anybody else who's... yes, Anand.
Just a couple of quick anecdotes that I recall so fondly about Sandy. And over the years, as you all have worked with Sandy closely, especially in her capacity as the departmental editor in management science. And I've really come to understand her work ethic and her values. But I want to tell a story that when she first moved to Atlanta, I wrote a note to her congratulating her on her move to Georgia Tech and said, Sandy, when you have some time, send me a note and let's get together for lunch. And, in her typical spirit, she immediately got back and said that would be wonderful, and we set a date to that we would meet for lunch. And Sandy said, I don't drive, and would you mind, I could come to a MARTA station, and would you mind picking me up from the MARTA station? And I said, sure, Sandy. And I think she had said for me to meet her at the Midtown Art Station close to Georgia Tech. And for whatever reason, somehow we had our wires crossed, and I went to a different MARTA station that day at Brookhaven. And I was waiting there for a good 10-15 minutes, did not see Sandy, and realized that I did not have her cell phone number or anything to sort of coordinate. So I called Eric at Georgia Tech and said, Eric, can you give me Sandy's phone number? I don't know where she is at, and I'm trying to coordinate. And Eric sort of, he was frantic, and he said, I don't have it either. And then somehow I just said, okay, let me try the next MARTA station, and I go to the right one this time. And sure enough, this was by now a good 35-40 minutes beyond the time that we had set to meet. And all this endurance, I think. This was in August in Atlanta, and those of you who know August, not a very pleasant month. And Sandy was waiting patiently at the MARTA station, waiting for me to show up. And we did have lunch, and absolutely. And I asked Sandy about herself. I said, I don't want this to happen again, and can I get your cell phone number? And she said, for a person that teaches IT R&D, I don't use technology very much, and I don't carry a cell phone. And then a few years later, she got a cell phone. By then, we were all with smartphones, and she got an old flip phone. And those of you who know Sandy was carrying that, and she was so proud. The next time she saw me, she said, you know what, Anandi, I've got now a phone. And she shows me this first generation flip phone that nobody was using at that time. And we're all going to miss Sandy in so many ways. And the other thing, I think the most important thing that I've learned from Sandy through working with her in the editorial board is not just her conscientiousness and how much, if people have talked about the work she, the way she corresponded with authors. And this morning, I think we remembered even her assigning a paper to you as an AE. She knew there was an automatic assignment that would go from the system, but she always followed it with a personal email. And I cannot imagine how many emails she wrote corresponding with all the associate editors and even personal notes to the reviewers if they were a little bit delayed. My last correspondence with her was just a day before she passed away. And I had sent a note to her saying that I was delayed on an AE report and I might take till the end of the next week to do it. And she got back and said, "Me too, Anandi, I am buried as well. See you at Informs." And that was the last email, and I was so hoping to see her at Informs this year.
We are all sad and we are all very shocked. But I hope there is a lot to remember Sandy by that you heard today and in your own experiences. So let's continue to follow that. Thank you again.